Picture this. December 1941. A single German general stands before a map of the Eastern Front, watching the greatest military machine in history crumble in the Russian winter. His name is Heinz Guderian, and he knows exactly how to save the situation. But there's one problem. Adolf Hitler won't listen. What if I told you that one man could have changed the entire outcome of World War II? Not through superhuman strength, not through secret weapons, but through pure strategic genius that Hitler himself destroyed. Here's the question. Would you have the courage to tell your dictator he's wrong, knowing it could cost you everything? Because that's exactly what Guderian did, and it cost Germany the war. The architect of Blitzkrieg. Heinz Guderian wasn't just another Wehrmacht general. He was the father of modern armored warfare, the man who revolutionized military strategy for the 20th century. In his seminal work, Achtung Panzer, published in 1937, Guderian laid out a vision that would terrify the world. Concentrated tank formations supported by aircraft smashing through enemy lines at unprecedented speed. As Guderian himself wrote, "The engine of the tank is as much a weapon as its gun." This wasn't just theory, it was prophecy. By 1940, Guderian commanded Panzer Group Guderian during the invasion of France. In just 6 weeks, his tanks covered over 400 miles, reaching the English Channel and forcing the British evacuation at Dunkirk. General Maurice Gamelin, the French Supreme Commander, later admitted, "We were defeated by a new form of warfare for which we were not prepared." But here's the critical detail most people miss. Guderian's success wasn't about superior German engineering or numbers. The French actually had more tanks, and many were better armored. According to military historian Basil Littlehart in his book The German Generals Talk, Guderian's genius lay in concentration, speed, and communication. He kept his armored spearheads together, while Allied forces scattered their tanks across the front. If you had invented a revolutionary military strategy that conquered France in 40 days, would you expect your leader to trust your judgment? Keep that in mind. Operation Barbarossa. The perfect plan, compromised. June 22, 1941. 3 million German soldiers crash into the Soviet Union in the largest invasion in human history. Guderian commands Panzer Group II, spearheading Army Group Center's drive toward Moscow. Within weeks, his forces advance over 400 miles, encircling massive Soviet armies. Field Marshal Fedor Bach, Guderian's superior, wrote in his diary, "Guderian's drive is without parallel in military history. The Russians are completely disorganized." By August 1941, Guderian's forces had destroyed or captured over 300,000 Soviet soldiers near Smolensk. Moscow lay just 200 miles ahead. The road was open. Guderian pleaded to continue the advance. Soviet defenses were in chaos. Winter was still months away, and the capital, the nerve center of Soviet command, was within grasp. But Hitler had other ideas. If you were Guderian, watching your chance for victory slip away because of a single bad decision, what would you do? Remember, he tried to speak up. It didn't work. The race for Moscow. So close, yet so far. October 2nd, 1941. Operation Typhoon begins, the final drive to capture Moscow. Guderian's forces push forward through increasingly desperate resistance. By December 2nd, advanced reconnaissance units of the 258th Infantry Division reach the outskirts of Moscow, just 15 miles from the Kremlin. Some soldiers can see the spires of the city through their binoculars. But something has gone catastrophically wrong. Temperatures plummet to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. German tanks won't start. Soldiers lack winter uniforms. Frostbite casualties exceed combat losses. Lieutenant General Gotthard Henrici wrote, "Our soldiers are freezing to death. The cold is a more terrible enemy than the Russians." Guderian sent desperate messages to Berlin. In Panzerleader, his post-war memoir, he recorded, "The troops are at the end of their strength. We need winter equipment immediately, or we must withdraw." Hitler's response was unequivocal. There will be no retreat. On December 5th, the Soviets counterattacked with fresh Siberian divisions equipped for winter warfare. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, commanding the defense of Moscow, later wrote, "We knew the Germans were exhausted. Their pause gave us the time we needed." Guderian made a command decision that would end his career. He ordered a tactical retreat to save his troops from encirclement. It was the militarily correct decision, but it directly violated Hitler's stand-fast order. Wehrmacht losses in the Moscow operation were staggering, over 250,000 casualties, including frostbite victims. The unthinkable had happened. The invincible Wehrmacht had been stopped and thrown back. Would you obey an order that you knew would destroy your army? Or would you do what Guderian did, save your men, and face the consequences? The fatal mistake, Hitler's interference. The disaster at Moscow wasn't just about weather. It was about systematic strategic incompetence from the top, and Guderian had watched it unfold in real time. According to General Halder's war diary, published as the Halder Diaries, Hitler increasingly micromanaged military operations, overruling his generals on tactical details they understood far better than he did. Halder wrote in December 1941, "The Führer's constant interference is making rational military planning impossible." The root problem? Hitler saw himself as a military genius, and in a few cases, his instincts proved correct. His decision to attack through the Ardennes in 1940 had been brilliant, but success had made him arrogant. By 1941, he trusted no one's judgment but his own. Guderian identified 3 catastrophic Hitler decisions that cost Germany the Eastern Front. 1. The Kiev diversion, August-September 1941, delayed the Moscow offensive by 6 weeks. 2. The Stand Fast Order, December 1941, prevented tactical retreats, causing unnecessary casualties. 3. The refusal to prepare for winter 1941. Despite warnings from Guderian and others, winter equipment wasn't supplied. In Panzerleader, Guderian wrote, "The German army could have taken Moscow in 1941. The Red Army was on the verge of collapse, but the time was wasted and the opportunity never returned." General Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Kluge, later reflected, "Guderian was right. Every general knew he was right, but Hitler couldn't admit his error, so he blamed the generals instead." On December 25, 1941, Guderian was relieved of command. The official reason was unauthorized retreat. The real reason? He had challenged Hitler and been proven right. When have you seen someone punished not for being wrong, but for being right at the wrong time? That's exactly what happened here. The turning point that never was. Here's what most history books don't emphasize. The Eastern Front was winnable in 1941. This isn't speculation. It's the assessment of Soviet commanders themselves. Marshal Zhukov admitted in his memoirs, Reminiscences and Reflections, if the Germans had maintained their drive on Moscow in August without diverting to Kiev, they likely have taken the city before we could organize adequate defenses. Nikita Khrushchev, who served as a political commissar during the battle, wrote, Moscow's fall in 1941 would have been catastrophic. Our government was prepared to evacuate to Kubashev. Our morale of our people was near breaking. The numbers tell the story. By December 1941, the Soviet Union had lost 2.5 million soldiers killed, wounded, or captured, 22,000 tanks, 18,000 aircraft, control of territory containing 40% of their population. One more push, properly supplied and timed, might have collapsed Stalin's regime. But that push never came, because Hitler's strategic meddling had exhausted the Wehrmacht at the worst possible moment. German General Walter Neering, who served under Guderian, later wrote, "The tragedy of the German army was that it had the finest tactical commanders in the world, but the worst supreme commander." The moment passed. The Soviets recovered. By 1942, Soviet production outstripped German losses. The tide had turned, and it would never turn back. How often does success or failure depend on one decision at one critical moment? In World War II, that moment was August 1941, and Hitler chose wrong. The human cost. Guderian's moral dilemma. War isn't just about strategy and statistics. It's about choices that haunt commanders for the rest of their lives. Guderian faced an impossible moral calculus in December 1941. Hitler had ordered no retreat. But Guderian knew that order would result in his panzer group being surrounded and destroyed. Over 100,000 men gone. He made the choice to disobey. In his memoir, Guderian wrote, "I knew my decision would end my career, but I could not send my soldiers to certain death to satisfy one man's pride. A commander's first duty is to his men." It's worth noting that other generals made different choices. Field Marshal von Kluge, Guderian's superior, chose to enforce Hitler's orders strictly. The result? Massive casualties and the near destruction of entire divisions. After the war, Guderian was asked if he regretted his decision. His response? "I saved 50,000 lives by that retreat. I would make the same decision again." But here's the uncomfortable truth. Guderian wasn't entirely innocent. He served a monstrous regime. His tanks spearheaded an invasion that killed millions. His brilliance enabled Nazi Germany's conquests. The moral complexity is inescapable. British historian Sir John Keegan wrote in The Second World War, "Guderian was a military genius who served evil ends. We can study his tactics without praising his cause." Where do you draw the line between following orders and moral responsibility? Between military duty and human decency? These questions don't have easy answers.
What if alternative history? Let's engage in some evidence-based speculation. What if Hitler had listened to Guderian? Scenario: Hitler approves Guderian's plan to drive directly to Moscow in August 1941. Military historian David Glantz, in When Titans Clashed, argues that Moscow's defenses in August were minimal and disorganized. Guderian's panzers would have faced perhaps 200,000 defenders versus the 1.2 million they encountered in December. If Moscow falls in September 1941, Soviet government evacuates or collapses. rail hub connecting the entire Soviet Union is severed. Stalin's regime faces legitimacy crisis. Winter arrives with the Germans already dug into defensive positions. Soviet General Rokossovsky later admitted, Moscow's capture in 1941 might have forced a negotiated settlement. Whether Stalin would have accepted such terms is another question. But here's the counter-argument. Other historians, including Richard Overy in Russia's War, argue that the Soviet Union's sheer size and population would have enabled continued resistance from the Urals, regardless of Moscow's fate. The sobering reality we'll never know. Hitler's decision to ignore Guderian ensured we'd never find out. Do individual decisions really change history? Or are larger forces, economics, population, resources, ultimately determinative? World War II suggests both matter. Heinz Guderian revolutionized warfare, conquered France, and came within miles of taking Moscow. He was quite possibly the finest operational commander of World War II, and Hitler fired him for being right. This is the ultimate lesson. Genius without wisdom is useless. Strategy without trust is fatal. And pride, especially a dictator's pride, can lose wars. Guderian died in 1954, having outlived both Hitler and the Nazi regime. In his final years, he reflected, "I served Germany, not Hitler. I wish I had understood the difference sooner." So here's my question for you. Do you think Guderian could have changed the outcome of World War II if Hitler had listened to him? Could one general really have made that much difference? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button. History isn't just about what happened, it's about what could have happened. And sometimes the path not taken is the most interesting story of all.